Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share skinwalker encounter horror stories. First story. I hunt skinwalkers for a living. For the public, my contact details aren't available. If they were, I'm sure I'd be hit up with many false calls, both on purpose and accidental. My number is reserved for the higher-ups who piece together if my service is needed. And last night it was. Publicly, there were a number of disappearances reported around a little hiking trail in Utah. A terrible thing, but not too uncommon. However, on the social media of the recently missing family and friends, there were some statuses that caught my higher-ups' attention. Some of them posted that during a memorial at the edge of the trails, they felt they could hear their dearly beloved's voice calling to them from the thick of the woods. Though they took this as a sign from God and hoped that this meant the missing would return, the people monitoring their personal pages felt otherwise, and that's where I came in. Skinwalkers are dangerous. In terms of raw strength, they outmatch us in almost every way, but it's their cunning that truly makes them the apex predator they are. I was called in to investigate as soon as I could. When I arrived, the police were there, the colorful lights bouncing around like a rave show. Leaning against the cars were a number of beat cops, sent there for the satisfaction of the locals that something was being done. I could tell they had a disdain the moment I approached, as this meant their quiet night of fooling around was to be disturbed with actual work. Trails closed, one said, a tone of finality to the words. I was called in to investigate, I shot back. That's our job. Let us handle things here. You can just go home, he replied. The exasperation in his tone told me he wanted me to just leave. Afraid I can't do that, I sighed. With that, he just stared at me. I could see the gears grinding in his head, along with his teeth. He gestured for me to join the rest of them, and I informed them everything I was legally allowed to divulge. That I was sent there from higher orders, and they were to let me do my job. However, a hitch I always run into is verifying the authority. You see, the paperwork I come in with always has no contact information, for obvious reason. But this means I am always faced with skepticism. In the end, I was met with a compromise. I could go in, but I was to take one of them as a partner to keep an eye on me, and my gun was to be confiscated. I begrudgingly agreed, knowing this was the best I was going to get if I wanted to go in that night. I was left to go into the thick of the woods with my new partner in crime, Austin. If I thought the guys back at the cars were begrudging in talking to me, Austin was practically dragging his heels. It seemed obvious that he had the lowest seniority, as he never even had a chance to protest about this arrangement. How long are we going to be out here? He groaned. As long as we need to, I said back, quieter than him. We've searched the trails a dozen times over. You're not going to find anything, he protested. You don't know what I'm looking for, I shot back, still at a lower tone. What are you looking for then? He whined, his voice carrying through the trees. With the way things were going, anything within a mile was going to hear us clearly. He had no tact for being inconspicuous, but I knew asking him to be quiet would be met with more questions, so instead I tried a different approach. Have you heard of skinwalkers? I asked him, breaking him out interrogation. Of course, they're a popular legend round these parts. They're often told to warn hikers not to wander too far. Do you know where they came from? Old native legends. You try and scare me or something? Correct. The legend stems more specifically from the Navajo, a southwestern Native American tribe. I shot back, ignoring his question. He scoffed at this, seemingly not wanting to hear more, but I continued. In the Navajo language, the word skinwalker is Yinagloshii and translates to he who walks on all fours. He grunted at my ignorance of his hints for me to shut up. However, when I talked, He didn't, and I spoke in a much softer tone than he did. I knew he needed stimulation to stop moaning. He was obviously bored and uninterested. So I decided to keep him distracted with a tale. I used to walk some of these trails when I was younger. I grew up rural, so hiking was the #1 pastime for a lot of my friends and I started. Yeah, a lot of people did. Some pretty popular walks round these parts, he bemused, not yet interested in my words. Well, this carried over to my adult life. When the stresses of my job got me down, I'd take to the trails and woods to calm myself. It was my form of meditation. You'll be surprised the amount of kind spirits you can bump into when in nature. It seems to brings out the best in people. That must be what she saw in me. I met her during a walk. Nothing grand. Just doing what everyone takes for granted in a densely wooded area, and she was jogging the same trail. We stuck together for the rest of the way, and were inseparable ever since. 2 years later, I called Regina my wife. Austin grunted, still not pulled in, but was now at least quiet. When we had our kid, Davis, I passed down this love for nature to him. He caught the bug as hard as I did his age, and we bonded as a family during our outings. We knew the land well, too well, so we decided to trails off to a lesser walked area. Our sense of adventure was at full swing. We knew we were more than experienced enough to look after ourselves. We had many tools to help us if we fell too far from society. But getting lost wasn't our downfall. I carried on. At that last statement, Austin's brow furrowed. Now, I knew I had his attention. Though he didn't say anything, I felt he wanted me to go on. We'd set up camp. It was quiet, a serene peace at first. But it was because of that solitude that the sound of a twig snap pulled us from our trance. The more creaks and crunches we heard, the more we realized how unnatural the silence was. It was an overbearing pressure that was only broken by the slowly approaching snaps of sound. The closest we heard it was the perimeter of our camp, and it stopped. We eventually settled down, but we never lost the feeling of being watched. I could hear the breaths through Austin's nose. Whether it was from exertion or anticipation of the story, he would probably never tell me the truth. The day after, things felt tense. We carried on with our excursion, but our backs always felt prickled with feelings of tension. It only took one lapse of judgment, and it was ironically when nature called. My son, Davis, just wanted to go potty. He told us he needed to go before sleep, so we let him out, autopilot in full swing after a heavy set of mental fatigue. It didn't take long for us to realize our error, but that was all it took. We slipped out our tent and cautiously made our way to our designated toilet area, and Regina quietly called out for Davis. He didn't answer. All that could be heard was our increasing breathing as panic started to set. But it was quickly broken by a meek voice calling out. I paused, purposefully. I could feel Austin's gaze on me while he waited for more, something I withheld. Eventually he burst out saying what happened next, seemingly out of impulse. I smiled, lavishing his attention, and carried on. It's okay, Regina. I'm right here, Davis exclaimed, jovially, as he slowly stepped half into the light of the campfire. Thank God, Regina soothed, rushing over to scoop him up in her arms. By the time I realized what jarred me, it was too late. What fun I was having scaring this fully grown man was gone by this point. This is the part of the story I hated telling the most. I didn't even wait for a response before going on. Davis's arm shot out, sharper than they had any right to be, and pulled her, torso first, into the darkness behind. Watching this, I froze, the words Davis spoke ringing in my head. Davis never called us by our names. I was kicking myself that I should have known sooner. I gritted my teeth. Even though I'd told this story many times before, to prepare people for what may come, it never got easier to tell. Still, I felt obliged to finish my story. I wanted to go after them. I wanted to rush in and pull them back from the brink of wherever they were. They supported this idea, Regina and Davis whining out for me to come to them, to save them, to join them. But their cadence was off, their emotions absent. I knew it was a trap, so I just dropped down and wept. All that lay after I finished the tale was silence. Austin's pace slowed as his mind deliberated on the information I spoon-fed him. I could practically see the cogs turning in his head while he weighed the words I said on his scales of skepticism. Another toll on his mind was that I distracted him enough to the point that we were far into the appointed trail I was to investigate. When I figured he'd reached an acceptance that he was stuck with me, I started asking questions about the case. I asked about the victims, where they went missing, when it happened, what's been found. I got him to put pock marks on my map, and that gave me some set areas to search. And search we did, to the moans and complaints from Austin, for 2 hours. I did my best to ignore him, and was quite casual in my work, until I found something small and white poking from the ground quite a ways away from the trail. A small piece of bone. I immediately hushed him in a serious tone, and he took note. A reaction that was seemingly instilled by the mood I set earlier. I inspected it carefully, trying to figure out its origins. The serious look on Austin's face washed away immediately when he saw what I was looking at. You got worked up over that? A piece of chicken bone? I ignored him while I surveyed the ground for more. He sighed and resigned himself to just stand there. But I had a new objective. Follow the trail of bone fragments. There were more scattered in one particular direction, and if I was careful and observant, I would find another piece, then another, then another. Eventually I found its origin. A body. However, it was not recently departed. The body before me, clad in torn colorful ribbons of hiking gear, had been there for a number of months, maybe years, old and decayed. The cop turned his head at this. Great, more paperwork. He must have been thinking. Finding a body this old is nothing but a headache for authorities. A cold investigation of wasted time lay before his feet. But I could recognize the work of a skinwalker anywhere. Knowing Austin would not take what I told him 100% seriously, I gave him the most simplest of instructions. Austin, I want you to keep a lookout for something that looks like a hollowed-out dog. Can you do that for me? Sure, whatever, he sighed, in acceptance. I took to investigating the body closer. The skin being removed completely was the first thing I noticed. But when I inspected the bones, I noticed they had been scraped away. Not gnawed or chewed, but scraped. Oh no, I thought. Quick. I yelled to Austin, and I reached into my pack. Put this on. I held out a mask, similar to the one I was putting on myself at the same time. I was obviously met with apprehension, but my tone got to him, on top of my own urgent actions, and he followed suit. And just in time, too, as an ominous obsidian cloud blew in around us. I forcefully covered my face in reaction. What is this? Austin blurted, muffled by the mask. Though I could tell he wouldn't believe me, I told him that skinwalkers make poisons from bodies. I knew he'd deny the part about the skinwalker, but he couldn't deny the danger around him. I slipped my hand behind me and pulled out my small blade. A needle-thin, stake-like dagger. A crisp sheen flickered from its polished silver metal. I squinted over to see Austin withdraw his pistol. I knew it wouldn't work. However, I didn't want to discourage him since I knew it'd still help as a distraction at best. What I also saw was that he didn't cover his face when the cloud blew in. Something I felt I shouldn't have had to tell him, but he didn't figure out in time. He was screaming in pain, rubbing the dust from his eyes, only making it worse since his arms and hands must have been coated by now. Before I had a chance to help him, he darted away, trying to get out the cloud. A rookie mistake. I left after him at a more cautious pace. I eased my way to where he went, following his panicked shouting. The juxtaposition of not believing what I told him to being attacked seemed to have sent him in a bit of a frenzy, though his skepticism was still apparent as he called out to his assailant like they were a human. "Give yourself up, and you will be shown proper treatment," he screamed. A terrible bluff. "I got him. Over here," I heard me say, which flipped his mood immediately. "Thank God. They're gonna pay for this," he said threateningly, through a grin, and shot off towards my voice. Except it wasn't me who said that. I didn't get a chance to stop him before I heard him jump into a nearby bush, followed by horrific screaming. It echoed around and faded away at frightening speed, further into the wooded area away from where I was, trying to avoid me coming in to help. At that I stood up, sighed, while stretching my aching limbs from all that sneaking, and got to work. Knowing I wouldn't be disturbed, I casually made my way around and set up wards all around the main trail. I saw some side trails, but ignored those. The cheapskates only paid for the main trail, so they only get the main trail. When I made my way to the edge of the trail, ready to call it quits, I saw them. Two familiar figures, with fresh smears of red on their faces and hands. My fist clenched at the sight of them. They don't have to do any threatening movements to provoke me, because they know how to get to me. After all these years, they consistently taunt me with the skins of Regina and Davis. Tattered, barely held together, but I recognized them regardless. It was dawn by the time I was done. I emerged from the trail and met the other police officers from before. They had less energy to challenge me this time, as they seemed tired from their long night of escapades. I told them I was done and grabbed my stuff. They asked where Austin was, and I told them he said he'd head back to meet them not long ago in an innocent tone, acting oblivious to everything that went down. I used their confusion as a chance to slip away and headed back. I informed the higher-ups that there shouldn't be a problem at that specific trail anymore, and that I'm open for any more work they send my way. But I didn't tell them the gritty details. That's the secret with my job. 99% of the time, the skinwalker never gets killed. I mean, they're damn near impossible to kill. You either have to burn their hidden skin, which they make damn well impossible to find, whisper their original human name, but that's often lost to the ethers of time, or somehow overpower them and kill them with silver, which I mean, good luck with that if you want to try. I've been around so long because I've been smart. I just work on cutting down their hunting grounds, one trail at a time. Second story. Finding Skinwalker Cave. Once, my uncle told me of a story about how he had seen skinwalkers by Shiprock, New Mexico. My uncle was a long-haul truck driver. He was coming back from Colorado and had pulled over by the Shiprock to stretch his legs and let his dog pee. We are Navajo, so he knew better to be walking around down there around sundown. But he was always mischievous and curious. His dog, Mose, got out and peed right away and wanted right back in the truck. No matter what my uncle did, he couldn't convince Mose to take a walk with him, even though they had been in the truck for over 10 hours. So my uncle takes a walk toward the actual Shiprock, and it's almost sundown. He continues to climb the rock. See, his friend had told him a story about a secret cave up on top, and he wanted to see if it was true. He continued to climb and circle the mountain. Soon he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He felt wrong in the pit of his stomach. but he had to see what was going on up there. I'm by no means condoning his actions. Soon he began to feel a weird vibration in his feet, but before he could process what was happening, he heard chanting. He began to climb again. The higher he went, the louder the chants got. It was almost as if they were calling to him. Soon he began to see a glow on the rocks. The closer he got, the more he could see the fire dancing against the rock walls. He carefully slid up a rock, and he was shocked to see 4 men dancing in animal skins. They circled the fire, always dancing, always chanting. Soon they began to change right before my uncle's eyes. My uncle was hidden low, but unable to move. The men's legs began to change as they danced. They were throwing some sort of herb into the fire and dance, round and round. My uncle watched as their hands began to turn into paws, but still they danced. Soon their faces began to morph and blur. My uncle felt a sickness take place in his chest and stomach. But what could he do now? He had to stay hidden. Their coyote faces still chanted, and their long coyote legs still danced. Soon their melodic chanting turned into howling. They still danced with 2 legs. The night was dark. There was no moon, no light except the light that came from the fire. My uncle wanted to run, but he knew if he ran it would be sure death. While he was thinking, and all of a sudden the skinwalkers took off in the blink of an eye. They ran down the mountain as if it were nothing. My uncle watched as they all went in different directions. He knew this was his only chance at escape. He tore down that mountain like he had a rocket up his ass. His words. He finally made it to his truck. His hair was still standing up on his arms. He jumped up to open the door, and there by the handle was a giant coyote print. It was red. He dared not touch it. He opened the door and started his truck up. He got out of there as fast as he could. He started to head towards Gallup, New Mexico. He was doing 70 down the highway, trying to get as far away as he could. When he looked out his passenger side window, he saw a giant coyote keeping pace with him. My uncle said it was almost like it smiled at him. It then ran off into the desert, and he never saw it again. He got up the courage to go back up the mountain in the daytime a couple of years later. He couldn't find the cave, and there was no evidence anything had ever happened there. He was sure some sort of bad medicine made it possible for them to do what they did. He also told me he was wearing his cedar berry necklace my grandma had made him. It had shielded and protected him. He died about a decade later, having had bad luck the rest of his life. Respect the old ways. Don't be going out at night and looking for evil, because it just might find you. Third story. 2 encounters with a skinwalker. I am from Michigan, however. I joined the Army when I was 21 and got stationed out in Colorado. Fort Carson to be exact. I am a single male, so I lived in the barracks with a roommate. My roommate was from New Mexico and is if Navajo descent. We didn't really talk and wouldn't say we are friends, but he had a conversation from time to time. One day I was looking up creepypastas and heard about Wendigos and skinwalkers. The more I learned about them, the more interested I became in them. Then we went on rotation to Europe, and I forgot all about them. Until we went to Germany, where we didn't do much but sit around. That is where my fascination with them started again. I would go to sleep listening to skinwalker stories. Something about being scared and sleeping is invigorating to me. I know, weird. In the stories it would always say don't ask a Navajo tribe member about them, 'cause they will shut you down. Well, me being me, I found my roommate, let's call him Justin, and I asked if he believes in them. Surprisingly, he didn't shut me down. He got kind of excited and said, "Yeah, dude, I haven't seen one, but I want to. My parents used to tell me about them." About 2 months later, we headed back to the States, did our Army stuff, and went on with our lives. Once again, I forgot about the skinwalkers and Wendigos. Until I didn't. I like to go on drives and listen to music, relaxing to me, I guess. I usually go during the day because the route I take has no lights on it for miles at a time. Well, at work one day we were really busy and really stressed out. I need to relax, so I decided I'd go on a drive. It was about 9:45 p.m. For anyone who has been on Fort Carson, I headed out Gate 1. Now out of Gate 1 you have three options. Go to the right, which will bring you to downtown Colorado Springs. Go straight, which brings you somewhere never took it. Or go left, which brings you on a windy road through the foothills of the mountains. Naturally, I went left. I started driving with the pitch-black road, my music blaring and unwinding. I got about halfway of my usual drive, then I heard a noise. It was the highest-pitched, bloodiest-sounding scream I have ever heard. I heard over my music. I turned down my music, not knowing what just happened. Again, I heard it, only a little louder. Out of now, where the smell of rotten eggs fills the air. I decided that now is a good time to turn around. I pull off to a side road and flip a U-turn. That's when I saw it in my rear-view mirror being lightened up with the red of my brake lights. A skinwalker. Since it would dark out and the red light didn't do much, I couldn't make our super specific details, but I saw these bright yellow eyes that's pierced through the night. It has antlers on its head, and it was standing on the back feet. I sat there for what seemed like forever, frozen in fear. It started to walk towards my car. With all my might, I told my body to move and move now. It didn't listen, frozen in fear. It got closer. All of a sudden, my phone rings and breaks me out of the trance. I let off the brake and put the pedal to the fucking floor. The entire way home, I was going 70 to 80 miles per hour, looking in my rearview mirror every 5 seconds. I swear I saw it a few times. I figured it was chasing me because the smell didn't go away until I got to Gate 5 of Fort Carson. I scanned my CAC and speed back to TH Barracks. Once I got back, I ran inside, not talking to anyone on the way. Got into my room and sat on my bed wondering if what just happened was real. I finally looked at my phone to see who called. Luckily, my best friend, we will call him Steve, called to get me on Xbox to play. I had another encounter with a skinwalker. Not as long or as scary as the first one. We were in the field down south in Colorado, in Pinyon Canyon. It was close to the end of our 3-week field problem. We dug foxholes at night, and somebody had to take first watch. Of course, that someone was me. The foxhole was about 100 meters away from our line of trucks. I get into it, and once again I start smell rotten eggs. I don't think much of it, 'cause the cooks were always throwing away old food. I scan the area over and over looking for Op 4. When my friend Steve, same guy from the first story, yells out to me, "Hey, we don't have to do guard tonight. Safety, stand down," from a good 50 meters away. I yell back, acknowledging him. Then from in front of me I heard, "Hey, you don't have to do guard," in Steve's voice, but in a lower, raspy voice. I look in the direction it came from, and there was Steve, standing in the tree line. I couldn't believe it. This time I knew it was a skinwalker, 'cause that explains the smell, and Steve being KN the other side of the concertina wire. The rest of the field problem went normally, and I haven't had an encounter since. I have moved back to Michigan and am living a happy life. However, these encounters pop into my head now and again. Fifth story. Saw a skinwalker on Riverdale Road last night. For context, me and my boyfriend go to this winding road called Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado. There is numerous things haunting this road, like a phantom Camaro that can run you off the road, or a little girl in a white dress who walks along the side of the road and can appear in your back seat, or even a jogger who was killed asking for a ride. It's an 11-mile stretch going from Thornton all the way to Frederick. Anyways, we go pretty frequently, but never really saw anything until a couple weeks ago. It was about 2:30 a.m. We were getting onto Riverdale through McKay. As we entered, the air was warm, but there was a pungent smell of horse shit, since people actually do live on this road and have horses and land here. We have our windows down, and not even 2 minutes on the road, my boyfriend shouts, "Holy shit, what the fuck was that?" Clearly panicking. I asked frantically over and over, "What did you see?" He was silent for a couple seconds, then rolls up his sleeves to uncover the goosebumps on his arm. When I looked over at him, his mouth was wide open with his hand covering it. I saw a figure, looked like something in a white dress, running in the field, he said in a very serious tone. After that, we were both shaken up and decided to leave immediately after. The whole ride home consisted of "What the fuck was that?" or "Are you sure that's what you saw?" We went to bed still thinking about what we had seen. He's very good at covering up his emotions, and I almost felt like I was more afraid than him, even though I hadn't seen it. We both were afraid of this road, for good reasons. After this encounter, it wasn't enough to stop us from coming back. We had gone back a couple times after, but never saw anything. We just felt like we were being watched. Very eerie feeling, almost sinister. Fast forward to yesterday. It was about 1:30 a.m., the same warm air, but this time it smelled of something rotting. Putrid smell. We go back, and right off the bat, we see two dead raccoons not even 100 feet from each other down the road. I didn't have any good feelings about that, and I already knew it wasn't a good sign, but we decided to continue. We traveled on the road 2 times, beginning to end, without seeing anything, and as we both wanted to leave, we said, "Well, fuck it, 3rd time's a charm," and went one last time. Except this time, we asked politely that if there was anything out, to show itself, and holy shit, I was not prepared to what I was about to witness. I don't think my boyfriend was ready to what he was about to hear either. As we get towards the middle of this road, there is a small concrete barricade on a slight curve, and that's where I saw it. Its pale, scrawny body, bald head, and long arms sitting, almost hunched over the barricade. Right when our car lights illuminate that thing, it swiftly hides behind the barricade, going back into the pitch-black woods behind it. I shout to my boyfriend, "Babe, did you fucking see that thing?" He replies, "No, what? What? What?" Petrified, since he was already on edge. I drive faster, and then it hit me. "Babe, I think that was an SW." He looks at me, a look of someone who has just seen a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost, it was something far worse. We left immediately after that, and don't plan on going back anytime soon. I can confidently say that was the most terrifying encounter I've ever had in my entire 20 years of existence. 7th story. Skinwalker stories from the past. This is a story my family told me when I was growing up. We live in a rural community on the Navajo reservation. My aunt and her 2 brothers were home alone while my grandparents had left for the evening to attend a chapter house meeting. They were in the house, and like many people from the reservation, they didn't have electricity. It had been dark outside for about an hour, and my aunt and my uncles were getting ready for bed. Outside, they heard noises, as if someone moving things around outside. My oldest uncle went to look out the front window and saw a figure out by the truck. This was immensely out of the ordinary because the closest neighbor was miles away. Whatever it was opened the truck door and began to dig through the personal items that my family had left in the vehicle. My aunt and uncles were frightened by the sight and knew that they should take action. They took out the rifle and all steadied themselves to hold it up. They flung open the door and aimed the gun at the dark figure. The figure turned and started to walk towards them, totally unfazed by the weapon. My uncle pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. The figure drew closer, and my aunt began to smell something like a rotting corpse. It was so strong it made her gag. My uncle continued to pull the trigger with no luck, and the figure came closer and closer. Off to the distance, headlights were coming up the road. My grandparents were returning. The figure looked toward the lights and started to move away and tucked itself behind a tree near the house. My oldest uncle ran toward the truck with the gun. My grandfather got out of the car and my uncle pointed to the tree. The thing was poking out its head to observe what they were doing. My grandfather ran into the house and over to the stove and grabbed a handful of ashes and rubbed over the gun and placed a ash-covered bullet into the chamber. He walked out onto the porch and fired toward the tree. Whatever that thing was didn't expect the gun to go off. The gunshot echoed and the dark figure began running. My grandma chased my aunt inside and my uncles and my grandfather went after it. There weren't many roads or paths, so as my grandfather and uncles chased after the figure, the truck was bouncing and the headlights were not fixed on one particular spot. My uncle swears that whenever the headlights would hit the figure he saw a woman. Not only that, whoever it was running on all fours like a bear. My grandfather eventually stopped the truck, and as they neared the ditch that drops about 20 feet, he got out and began to yell in Navajo. My uncle says that he was yelling about a local woman. He yelled that he wasn't scared and that he knew it was her and to leave his family alone. A few days passed, and there was news that the woman that my grandfather was yelling about had passed. I've always been told that if you know who the skinwalker is, say their name, and it will kill them. Eighth story was saved from a skinwalker. For about a year and a half I, 22M, dated my ex, 23M, who was Native American, specifically Navajo. Our relationship got serious enough that we introduced each other to our parents. He and his family lived close to our college, so I would go over there quite frequently for dinner or just to visit. During spring break, his parents invited me to come with them to a log cabin they and their extended family had rented for a weekend. I accepted and honestly got kind of excited as I felt like my BF and I were moving up in our relationship. I also could count the number of family vacations I had taken growing up on one hand, so there was that. The night before we drove to the cabin, my BF's parents invited me over for dinner, and after they sat me down to talk to me about the next couple days. I already knew my BF's grandparents were extremely in touch with Navajo traditions and could be harsh to certain people they saw as outsiders. They basically explained that they may not accept me immediately and that they apologized if at any point they offended me. I thought about what they said the entire drive to the cabin, and it honestly only made me even more nervous the closer we got to our destination. Meeting a boyfriend's family for the first time was stressful enough, but adding on the fact we were the same gender and that his family may view me as an outsider made my chest unbearably tight. As we drove up to the cabin, immediately we saw that there was a group standing outside of it. My BF's dad parked the car. He and his wife jumped out to run over to the crowd to see what the issue was. The yelling was so loud you could hear it almost clearly, despite us still being in the car. I asked my BF who the people were, and he said they were all different family members, and that a serious argument must have broken out. We got out of the car and walked around to the front of it so we could see what was going on. It looked like it was about 9 people yelling at one guy. The guys had his back to us, but I remember his bizarre way of standing. It's hard to describe, but if I had to give a comparison, it would be Mr. Crocker from Fairly Odd Parents. The argument was so heated it looked like nearly everyone was ready to start throwing punches. Finally, the guy with his back to us yelled something before turning and walking in our direction. I thought he was walking directly towards us, but then I realized he was on the path to walking past us. As he walked by me, I remember he looked at me really quick and we made eye contact. His hair was long and shaggy and came down over his face, but I could still see his eyes. They looked immensely glazed over, like the guy was beyond high. Despite nothing technically being off about him, it just felt like I had looked into the eyes of a mannequin or something. Getting over my uneasiness, I noticed the guy hadn't walked to a car, but instead had continued to walk until he walked into the woods. I turned to my BF and asked where he was going and who that was, and he said that he was pretty sure it was one of his uncles, but he hadn't seen him since he was a kid. We both assumed the guy had maybe went to blow off some steam or walk off a high. My boyfriend's parents came back and said everything was fine now and that we could take our bags out the car to head inside. Log cabin was honestly an understatement. The house they had rented out for weekend was massive. It had enough rooms where everyone's personnel family had their own rooms. I was beyond shocked to learn that my BF's parents had gotten us our own room, although it was the smallest. We settled down, and then I got to go around and meet my boyfriend's family. Unexpectedly, everyone was beyond nice. I kind of felt like I'd be treated like an outsider given how traditional my BF had said his extended family was, but nearly everyone I met greeted me with a giant hug and warming smile. I guess the two exceptions were my BF's grandparents. Both seemed very contained and had this very serious look on their faces. As I approached them to introduce myself to them, they both looked me over a couple of times before moving. Soon they both stood and gave me a very strong-handed handshake and pat on the shoulder. It wasn't a dream-come-true loving welcome, but it was at least a gesture of acceptance. As the night went on, everyone in the house talked, drank, ate, and even had a period where one family member brought a guitar out and we all drunkenly sung covers of popular songs. I had an amazing time, and it was defiantly a night I wouldn't forget. I do, however, remember this tense feeling that was with me the entire night. Like something was around me, but that I couldn't see. The night flew by, and before long it was sometime after 1 a.m., and everyone was ready to go to bed. Before anyone made their way to the room for the night, my BF's grandfather called everyone into the living room for a family meeting. I figured I was a guest, so that included me, but before I was able to grab a seat, several male family members told me I wasn't allowed to be here for this and that I had to go upstairs. I was kind of disheartened by this, but I made my way up to my room. To be fair, I wasn't alone, as the Caucasian wife of some member of the family was also not allowed to sit in on the meeting. I went upstairs, showered, and went to my room to mess around on my phone until my boyfriend came upstairs. While I waited, I got a sudden surge of anxiety. I don't know where it came from, but my heart just started racing and it felt like I was about to cry. It lasted for only a minute or so, but freaked me out big time. After it ended, I sat there confused and slightly shaking. My BF walked in, and seeing him settled me down. I didn't feel the need to mention it to him, as he'd defiantly laugh at me. He showered. We talked for a bit about the day. We did what a couple tends to do when in bed at night, then we both went to sleep. That night I shot up out of my sleep. I wasn't having a nightmare. I wasn't even having a dream. Suddenly I was awake and vaulted out of bed. Standing there, I was confused as hell as to why my body had jolted itself awake. I thought maybe my BF had kicked the shit out of me or suddenly snatched all the covers, but when I looked down at him, he was calmly snoring with my side of the covers thrown over him from me vaulting awake. I looked at the clock, and it read 4:10. I was kind of freaked out by my weird wake up, but I realized I had to pee, so I threw on my t-shirt and shorts and left our room to make my way to the bathroom at the end of the hall. After doing my business, I walked out of the bathroom and into the hallway. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway and sat next to a window. I stopped at the window to take in the nighttime scenery. I looked at the moon casting light over the family's parked cars. What stole my attention away from the cars was a figure moving among the crowd of vehicles. I couldn't tell what it was, but I just watched as it walked up and down the rows of cars. I figured it was someone maybe looking for their car in the darkness of the night, but as my eyes adjusted, the figure clearly wasn't walking like a person. It looked like a black dog or wolf or something four-legged. We were in a heavily wooded area, so I figured it wasn't abnormal for wildlife to wander close to the house. But then the figure stood up. It didn't stand, wobble around, then plant its front legs on the ground. It stood and continued moving through the rows of cars. I watched as the thing walked with a stiff gait around the vehicles before it just stopped to face the house. The darkness seemed to coat the creature as I couldn't make out any of its features other than its outline. Then it simply looked up at me. Not in the sky or up at the house, but at me. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me directly. From its dark form, I saw two small white dots on its head. Just two pinpoint-like dots that stared at me from outside. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but what I do know was that before I knew it, I was walking downstairs and to the front door. I just moved, no reason or wanna, but my body was suddenly in motion. As I unlocked the front door, an iron-like hand grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. I looked over and saw my BF's granddad standing there staring at me with a look that I'll never forget. He didn't say anything. He just relocked the door and turned me to face him. I saw him place something against the door before he pulled out something from his pocket with a light. He lit it and circled it around my head, saying something under his breath. I remember being utterly confused, but just completely submissive to whatever was going on. As he finished, he used his fingers to put out whatever he lit and told me to go back upstairs. Slowly, I moved back towards the stairs, but as I turned around, I saw him pick up what I realized was a shotgun from off the door frame. I walked upstairs and stopped before entering my room. I looked at the window and didn't even have to walk over to it to know that that thing was still out there. I laid back in bed, and after about 30 minutes of ceiling watching, I went back to sleep. It was easily the worst sleep I'd ever gotten. I had what felt like 24 hours worth of nightmares that was just me running from something. I was running in slow motion and could hear something fast running after me. Right as I heard it get to me, the dream would restart. I woke up later that morning around 10 a.m. or so and saw my BF was covered in sweat as he slept. He never sweated while he slept, and the room was a cool 64 degrees, so I found it disturbing. I literally had to shake him for about 5 minutes before he woke up. At first, he just dreamily stared straight ahead before he registered I was looking over him. I can honestly tell you that my BF is a part of our college's ROTC program, and he is used to waking up early. 99% of the time, he would wake up 2 hours before me when he slept over. Not to mention in the rare cases that he did sleep longer than me, he would snap awake whenever I touched him. He lazily got dressed before we both went downstairs to find the entire house in a dreamlike state. Everyone moved through the house like zombies, and everyone seemed half dead. Before anyone worked on breakfast, my BF's grandfather called for another family meeting. I was still not allowed to listen, but this one lasted much longer than the last. When it was over, my BF and his parents told me we were packing up and leaving. I couldn't argue as everyone in the house simultaneously moved to their rooms to pack up their items. Within an hour, everyone had packed up and placed their belongings in their cars. As we drove away from the massive cabin, I couldn't help but feel like those same small white were watching us from just out of sight. During the ride home, my BF, the car was quiet. When we stopped to get gas, I tried to ask my BF why he had left, but he just looked at me and said it was hard to explain. Even after they dropped me back off at my campus apartment, I wondered if the reason the trip had been canceled was because of the figure I had seen that night, as well as the dreamlike state everyone had woken up in. Up until we broke up, I would ask my ex why the trip had been canceled, and he never really gave a direct answer. He'd just say that I wouldn't understand, or that it was a family dispute. It wasn't until after we broke up that I saw a documentary on skinwalkers. It made me shudder to think what would have happened if I had opened that door and walked outside. 9th story. Skinwalker took my cousin. When something like this happens, it happens out of absolutely nowhere with no warning. It's not some horror movie or story where you know something is about to happen. I'm going to describe what I felt and what I saw. I've been looking for somewhere to share this, and hopefully someone can tell me what happened. I had never heard of Reddit or skinwalkers or anything before this happened. I wish I could say something cliche like I was on Skinwalker Ranch or my grandma is a Navajo or some shit like that, but I can't. I had never heard of the Navajo Indians or skinwalkers or anything, and I sure as hell didn't believe anything like that existed, or even gave a fuck about it. I am 16 years old, and this happened this summer, June 9th, 2018. I grew up in the suburbs near Atlanta, so I had a completely normal life until this happened. I was off of school, so me and my dad went up to Denver to visit my uncle and aunt and my cousin. I have no other cousins my age except for this one, so we were pretty close and kept in touch often. His name is Charlie, but we share the same last name cause his dad is my dad's brother, so I won't use our last name. Charlie was pretty big on mountain biking, so he wanted to take me to some mountain biking trails in Apex Park. The trails are not far away from civilization at all, and we weren't even going to spend the night there. We went down a few trails, everything was fine, and we passed some people, so we weren't alone. Absolutely nothing sketchy went down. It was hard to keep up with him, but he slowed down for me, and we had fun. It was around 6 p.m., and we were heading back to where we parked. Charlie was 18, so we drove ourselves. This is the part where everything goes to hell. We are riding back. Charlie is maybe 20 feet ahead of me. Then the smell hit me. God, the smell. It was disgusting. At first, I thought maybe we passed a dead animal or something. It was more metallic though, and it was very heavy in the air. Charlie stops but doesn't get off his bike. I slow down and stop next to him. He looks at me with a disgusted face. Do you smell that? What the fuck? The smell started to get stronger. It was so strong that I felt like gagging. Looking back, I wish that I had felt something watching us, or at least any indication that something was not right so that we could have left or found somebody. I guess Charlie had heard stories about these things because I saw his face change from disgust to absolute fucking terror as the realization hit him. Oh fuck. In less than 1 second from him saying that, something went by so fast and tore him off that bike. I did not see it because I could barely process what the absolute fuck was going on. I was still on my bike staring at the place he just was. Chills flooded my body so fast that my vision went black even though my eyes were open. Then the adrenaline hit me. My brain pounding, but I had no thoughts. I didn't scream. Then I fucking looked up. It was right there. So fucking close to me. It looked down at me because it was huge, maybe a couple feet taller than me. I wish I could tell you I didn't get a good look, but it's always crystal clear in my memory. It was like a wolf, but standing upright like a person. Its fur was matted and greasy and fucking disgusting. But that wasn't what I was looking at. It had Charlie's face, smiling at me. The closest thing I can describe my reaction to is when the people in Bird Box see the monsters. God, I am crying writing this right now. The smile was pure evil but indescribable. Its mouth was way too big, and it was literally smiling from ear to ear. Then the eyes. Oh God, the eyes. They were pure black, but not glossy. Like the black that absorbs 99% of light. At first, I couldn't even tell if he had eyes, but they were blacker than empty, if that makes sense. It is very hard to describe this. It wasn't breathing, just standing absolutely still. I could feel the strength radiating off of it, like a power not of this earth. There was no sign of Charlie anywhere. No screaming. Nothing. I knew I was next. I knew 100% I was going to die. My eyes flooded, but it wasn't like I was crying. The pure fear and chills just made my tear ducts run. Suddenly it dashed away so quick I felt and heard the air rush around me. I felt someone grab my shoulder. Kid, are you okay? It was a fit guy in his mid-40s and his wife. I hadn't even heard them approach. Keep in mind that from Charlie saying, "Do you smell that?" to this guy grabbing me on the shoulder was about a 10-second span. All the things I just described were the emotions that were flooding me in that time, not actual thoughts. Then it hit me. I couldn't speak. I was gasping for air, my head pounding, vision blurry. Are you okay, kid? I just cried and I was trembling so hard the guy thought I was having a seizure. I don't remember leaving the trail, I just remember getting to the exit, then getting to the hospital. Charlie is gone. After that, he went missing, but I know he is dead. They only found his bike completely destroyed. They sent a search party after him. No one believed me. They think he just got lost and or attacked by an animal. I went home. I have diagnosed PTSD now and nightmares almost every night. My life has been completely destroyed by this, and I know nothing will ever be the same. I couldn't leave my house for a long time. The days after that I spent researching what that thing was, and the closest thing I guess would be a skinwalker. It's nice to know I'm not the only one and people on this site can actually believe each other. Everyone thinks I am crazy.